On the anniversary of his death, look at this report that just dropped on Malcolm X. Almost 56 years since the day Malcolm X was assassinated in New York City, lawyers and family members of the late civil rights and black nationalist leader released new evidence they claim shows the NYPD and FBI conspired in his murder. It comes in the form of a deathbed letter attributed to a former undercover NYPD officer who claimed he was pressured by supervisors to lure two of Malcolm X's security men into committing crimes a few days before the assassination on February 21st, 1965. The arrests kept the two men from managing door security at the Audubon Ballroom in Washington Heights on the day of the shooting, according to the letter. The letter, written by Raymond Wood, was authorized for posthumous release by a cousin. It was read on Saturday at a press conference attended by three of X's daughters and members of Wood's family. No details about the circumstances and timing of Wood's death were provided. Quote, under the direction of my handlers, the letter states, I was told to encourage leaders and members of the civil rights groups to commit felonious acts. Whoa. Whoa, 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 whoa. So, the idea is, hey, maybe the NYPD and the FBI, so the federal government and the police, were in on the assassination of Malcolm X. Now, I know a lot of you people are listening now going, duh, like, of course. But it actually isn't an of course. And it isn't an of course because if you know the biography of Malcolm X and the history of Malcolm X, you know that there actually is a strong case that's made that it was people affiliated with and associated with the group that he was a part of, the Nation of Islam, where Elijah Muhammad was his teacher and his leader, and he, supposedly learned everything from him. And what happened was Malcolm, over time, learned that this guy, who he looked up to as basically a god, he was a fraud. And he, was basically running a cult and using his position of power and authority to fornicate, for lack of a better word, with so many of the women that were around him. And this was directly against his own teachings. And Malcolm X saw that hypocrisy and he couldn't reconcile it. And so that eventually led to, a split between Malcolm, who was basically Elijah Muhammad's number two in command, led to a split between him and Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. And so what happened was there's a lot of people who are really, really loyal to Elijah Muhammad. What he would do is take young black men who perhaps never had a fair shot in life and were institutionalized and had been through the system, and he helps rehabilitate them. And he helped teach them personal responsibility and, how to be a man, how to be a leader, how to have your own family, how to provide, how to build a community, how to create a future that's brighter than what they have currently. And so a lot of people were fiercely and viciously loyal to Elijah Muhammad, including Malcolm, until, he realized that he's dude's kind of a fraud. So there was an ugly breakup. There was an ugly breakup between them, and there's, there were a number of attempts on his life. And the dominant theory was, yes, it was basically henchmen from Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam that went after Malcolm. And that, honestly, again, if you know the history of it, if you've read his biography, that is not far-fetched. It's the likely scenario that even if you say the FBI and the NYPD played a role in this, there's almost no doubt that also the Nation of Islam played a role in it, because it got really, really ugly between them. And then you got to understand that there's pre-Mecca Malcolm X and there's post-Mecca Malcolm X. Before he went to Mecca, he was a hardcore black nationalist. And, that's what the Nation of Islam taught. And that's what Elijah Muhammad taught. And then post-Mecca, he really became not fully like Martin Luther King and his philosophy, but a lot more like Martin Luther King and his philosophy, where Malcolm X still believed in self-defense, whereas, MLK believed in peaceful, nonviolent resistance, didn't even necessarily believe in self-defense. He was like a pacifist. Malcolm still believed in self-defense, but he went from basically literally telling white people, I don't want your help, I don't need your help in fighting for my rights, you could piss off, I'm trying to create a separate black-only nation. That's what a black nationalist and black separatist is, right? He went from that philosophy to more of a Kingian philosophy of like an egalitarian approach. People can come together, people can love each other, and I'll work with anybody for black liberation and black rights. And he wasn't as much of a black nationalist anymore. So there's pre-Mecca Malcolm and post-Mecca Malcolm, and the new Malcolm pissed off everybody in the Nation of Islam, big time, including Elijah Muhammad. And again, so the story is really complex and really interesting. He's one of the most fascinating guys I've ever learned about. And honestly, I would still say, to this day, there's a lot of dynamic speakers out there. Nobody is a better speaker than Malcolm X. Malcolm X is probably the greatest speaker of all time, in my opinion. He's one of those people who's just so immensely captivating when he talks that you're hanging on every word he says, and it lands instantly when he says something. Like the second he says anything, you just get it. It lands. So he's probably the best communicator I've ever seen ever. So really fascinating guy, really interesting guy. What they're saying is an undercover officer was like, yeah, I was told to screw over Malcolm's security guards, try to bait them into committing felonies so that they wouldn't be there to protect him the day he was murdered. So what does this tell me? Listen, it tells me that there were probably a number of groups that were working on killing Malcolm X. I don't think it's just the NYPD and the FBI, but I certainly think they played a role because, listen, we know the history of them, right? Just like the CIA's overthrown foreign governments, and these are known facts. The FBI tried to get Martin Luther King to kill himself. Why would they be? Malcolm X was way more hardline than Martin Luther King, so why would they go soft on Malcolm X? By the way, that's how we learned that Martin Luther King was cheating on his wife, is because he was getting spied on by the federal government, and so they sort of released that information. They tried to see if Malcolm X he wasn't cheating on his wife. He was really living like a squeaky clean life in many respects. No drugs. This was when he was younger, he did that, and then as soon as he evolved and created this ideology, he was no longer doing that. But like, no, I don't put it past the FBI and the NYPD to want him killed. Of course they probably wanted him killed, but I still think that there was a number of hands involved here. And, there's a Netflix documentary out on the killing of Malcolm X. And if I'm not mistaken, I watched it, but I was like half asleep as I was watching it. I'm pretty sure they conclude it was somebody who was a member of the Nation of Islam. So you have some evidence in that direction. Now there's evidence that the NYPD and the FBI played a role. I think that's probably all true. I do. I think that's probably all true. That's all correct. And, listen, there's been speculation for a long time. I'm not breaking news here. I mean, you guys might not know the ins and outs and the details of this, but I've followed this really closely because I've always been interested in it. There was speculation that Farrakhan was either one of the people who killed Malcolm, or he knew about it because he was in the Nation of Islam. He was in the Nation of Islam, and now he is the Nation of Islam, right? Like he's the lead guy, and he's been for a long time. So there's always been speculation that he was involved. I don't think the documentary really touched on that much. The Netflix documentary, or it might have been Hulu documentary. I don't remember one. It's one or the other. I don't think they touched on it that much, and so it's still an open question. But over the years, Farrakhan has made some eyebrow-raising, questionable comments about Malcolm, where you listen and you're like, you know stuff, and you're not saying, enough here. So, anyway, really fascinating historical character, amazing, best speaker I've ever heard. And my new operating theory is that they were all involved. So it wasn't just the NYPD and the FBI. I'm sure the Nation of Islam was involved in one way or another. But yeah, my new operating theory is that they were all involved to one extent or another. How much, was one involved versus the other, I'll never know. We'll never know. We'll probably never know. We'll never know if it was primarily the Nation of Islam that did it and the FBI and the NYPD sort of helped, or if it was primarily the FBI that did it and the Nation of Islam and the NYPD helped, or if it was primarily the police that did it and the FBI and the Nation of Islam helped. But I do think that there's reason to believe there was a full conspiracy and cover-up, and a number of people wanted him dead.